It's strange how much a smile can say, how much it can betray. I used to think smiles were simple, innocent expressions of joy or politeness. But over time, I learned that a smile could carry deeper, sharper truths, revealing everything someone might try to hide. I first truly understood this on a warm spring evening, standing across from my wife, Marin. That evening is burned into my memory, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. It was all in her smirk, a smug, almost gleeful little curl of her lips. That told me everything I needed to know. For weeks, I had felt something was wrong. Marin had become more distant, more guarded. Her phone never left her side, and there was a coolness in her affection, like she was playing a role she no longer believed in. That night, I gathered my courage and asked her directly, "Are you seeing someone else?" There was a pause. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside the open window. Marin didn't deny it. She just smiled, that knowing, cruel little smirk, and in that instant I understood. Words weren't necessary. Her expression said it all. She didn't respect me enough to even lie. For a moment, anger consumed me. But quickly, something colder, sharper settled in its place. Resolve. I realized pleading or arguing would be beneath me. Instead, I decided I would not suffer quietly. If Marin thought she could humiliate me, I would show her I was not the man she thought so little of. It didn't take long for a plan to form. I reached out to an old acquaintance, Celine, a woman who knew how to command attention effortlessly. Celine had a way of turning heads, making rooms orbit around her without even trying. I explained my situation, and to my relief, she agreed to help. Marin's charity gala was approaching, an event she had been obsessing over for months, positioning it as her crowning social achievement. It was the perfect stage for my quiet revenge. When Celine and I arrived together, the transformation in the room was almost immediate. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and a palpable energy shifted toward us. I felt Marin's eyes on me the moment we entered, felt a flicker of panic and confusion ripple through her. Marin tried to mask it, but it was no use. She was drowning, and the more she tried to regain her footing, the more obvious her desperation became. I watched as she clumsily tried to draw attention back to herself, forcing laughter that sounded shrill, inserting herself into conversations where she clearly wasn't wanted. Meanwhile, Celine moved like a queen to the crowd, gracious, magnetic, leaving Marin looking small and misplaced in the grand setting she had so carefully crafted. In the days that followed, I turned my focus to gathering evidence. I didn't want a messy, drawn-out war. I wanted an undeniable, airtight case. I found hidden financial records, secret bank accounts, lavish gifts purchased for a lover, enough damning information to ensure she had no footing to stand on. I also unearthed photos and messages that painted a vivid picture of betrayal. When I finally presented Marin with the divorce papers, I chose a conservatory, a glass-walled haven we had once filled with laughter and dreams of the future. Now, it felt fitting to confront her amidst the withering remnants of what we once had. I laid the papers on the table between us, along with the evidence, and watched the blood drain from her face. She didn't cry, at least not at first. She tried to argue, to blame me for her choices, to guilt me into reconsidering. When that failed, she turned to anger, hurling accusations, trying to claw back some measure of control. But none of it mattered. I could see the truth as clearly as her earlier smirk had shown me. She wasn't sorry for what she did, only that she had been caught. As I moved on with my life, it was almost surreal to watch Marin's world unravel. The social circles that once orbited around her began to drift away. Business opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped arriving. It wasn't my doing. It was simply the natural consequence of her actions. Without the image she had so carefully maintained, there was nothing left for people to admire. Months later, at a private gathering hosted by mutual acquaintances, I saw her again. Marin stood alone by the edge of the terrace, a ghost of the woman she used to be. Gone was the smug confidence, the radiant charm. What remained was a hollow version of her former self, desperate, lost, clinging to anyone who would still give her a second glance. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. She tried to muster a smile, but it faltered halfway. This time, There was no mask to hide behind, no smugness, only regret and emptiness. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a distant, melancholy acceptance. Marin had built her life on superficiality and deceit, and when the foundation crumbled, there was nothing left to hold her up. I turned away, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had survived the storm she brought into my life, and I had emerged stronger, not through cruelty or revenge, but by refusing to let her brokenness define me. As I turned away from Marin that evening, a profound sense of closure settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. What I felt was a quiet sense of peace, the kind that comes when you finally let go of a heavy burden you carried for far too long. Life, for me, moved forward in ways I hadn't anticipated. I poured my energy into rebuilding myself, focusing on the dreams and passions I had once shelved for the sake of marriage that, in hindsight, had long been hollow. I traveled more, visited places I'd always talked about seeing, but never had. I reconnected with old friends I had grown distant from and forged new bonds with people who valued honesty and kindness. In those first few months after the divorce, I realized just how much of myself I had lost trying to hold together something that was never truly mine to begin with. Marin had always been more in love with the idea of herself, the perfect life, the perfect image, than she had ever been with me. I had simply been another accessory to that image, another piece of furniture in her curated world. There were still hard days, of course. Healing isn't a straight line, and there were moments when old wounds ached, when a familiar song or forgotten photograph would stir up memories. But with each passing day, the pain lessened, replaced by a growing sense of gratitude, not for what had happened, but for the strength that had awakened in me. One evening, about a year after everything had fallen apart, I found myself walking through the city park alone. The air was crisp with the first chill of autumn, and the trees blazed in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. As I strolled past the duck pond, I spotted a young couple laughing together on a bench, their faces lit up with a kind of pure, unguarded joy that felt almost foreign to me. For a moment, I wondered if I would ever find that again. Something real, something untainted by lies and betrayal. But then I realized that I wasn't in a rush. I didn't need to fill the empty spaces immediately. It was enough to simply exist, to enjoy my own company, to know that I was no longer trapped in someone else's illusion. In time, love might find me again. And if it did, I would be ready, not because I needed it to complete me, but because I would be coming to a whole wiser and with a heart that had survived the worst and still found the courage to stay open. As for Marin, I occasionally heard whispers about her through mutual acquaintances. She had faded from the social scene, her once celebrated charity work dwindling into obscurity. There were rumors of new ventures, half-hearted attempts to reclaim her former glory, but nothing seemed to stick. The world she had so desperately tried to control had moved on without her, and she was left clinging to memories of a past that could never be resurrected. I bore her no ill will. In the end, Marin had been her own worst enemy. I had simply stepped out of the way and allowed the truth to catch up to her. Walking home that night under a canopy of stars, I smiled to myself. Not the bitter, hollow kind of smile I had learned to recognize in others, but a true one, a smile born from survival, from freedom, from the knowledge that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, living honestly, and never letting someone else's betrayal define your worth.